We three kings of Orient are. Probably not. Or at least not in part. Yep, happy Epiphany. And for this edition of Sky Study, we're going to talk about the Magi. Yep, that's their technical title. Wise guys is also appropriate. Of course, I have to make note of the fact that Magi is short for magicians, and that's what most scholars think they were, at least in some respect. Sages, astrologers is not quite good enough, but they also probably weren't kings. Now, they might have been dignitaries or emissaries for a king, or they might have been, due to that country, they might have been like kings. So that's how they came to be known as kings. But by our technical definition of kings, they probably weren't. But hey, here's a fun thing you can do on Epiphany. You can take your wise men, right, and you can make a parade. And you can go down the line, right, heading towards baby Jesus. And this is, I don't know, this is kind of a fun thing to do depending upon how many wise men you have. Meaning if you only have a few in your house, you might say, oh, well, that was a short parade. But in any respect, these are small ones. This is a small set. I don't know, can you even see them at all? They're really small. Yep. Come up here to these big boys. Yep, and so they reach Jesus when he's a child. They reach Jesus when he's at the house in Bethlehem, and they come to the house. And how do we know these things? Well, it says it right there in the Bible. Look it up. Check it out. Matthew chapter 2. And by the way, the wise men are, yes, in Matthew. The typical birth story is in Luke chapter 2. So it is kind of interesting to note that. We don't know how many there were. That's why it's sometimes fun to do the parade of wise men, like I said. We guess that there were three, because there were three gifts. And of course, everybody knows what the three gifts are: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But do you know that the gold may or may not have been designated for the Christ child? It might have been from their stash for the journey. The frankincense is incense, and the myrrh is a more mortal gift. That's kind of the weird part. You know, the joke is that if it were three wise women, they would have actually brought useful gifts for a baby, like diapers, spit up cloths, you know, maybe a couple jars of food. Anyhow, the myrrh is actually kind of like an embalming ointment. Yeah, the incense would have been certainly useful for worship. So, of course, those three gifts together make gifts suitable for a king. The other thing that's kind of interesting to keep in mind here is that Jesus, according to the prophecies, would be a prince. And although maybe not really totally viewed that way by the people, but Herod was the king. And so that's where the threat and the tension all comes in there, in that Jesus was prophesied as the prince that would become king. And then here these three weirdos from the east show up and say, hey, where's the new king? And Herod says, new king? Yeah, how about you find him for me? And then I'll show up. Interesting little tidbit. Herod then became stereotypical for a shallow or false follower. So you don't want to be Herod. You don't want to act like you're interested in Jesus, but then don't do anything about it. How else can you consider Epiphany? Epiphany is one of those great days in which we think about how God becomes manifest in our lives, how we recognize that God has been there, and now we finally see it. So what sorts of ways can you recognize seeing God around you? What ways does God kind of come into your life like three strange men and appear before you? What gifts do other people bring to you that you can rejoice and give thanks to God about? Happy Epiphany!